Charleston's King Street was quiet after dark, its boutiques shuttered, the gas lamps flickering softly above the brick sidewalks. The scent of blooming jasmine drifted through the spring air. It was the kind of stillness that made the world feel hushed, like it was holding its breath. Noel Whittaker leaned against the corner of a historic storefront, his hands tucked in the pockets of a weathered jacket. He didn't stand like a man on duty. He stood like someone who had learned to stay alert, even when no one asked him to be. People passed him without notice. Another quiet face in the night. Across the street, a woman exited a private club, heels clicking with a confident rhythm. She paused under the soft glow of a street lamp, adjusting the silk wrap around her shoulders. Her hair, coiled in a low chignon, shimmered gold under the light. There was a grace to her, the kind that didn't ask for attention, but always received it. Noel noticed her because she stopped too long. She looked over her shoulder twice. Her smile from earlier, polite, polished, was gone. He watched as she stepped down from the curb, eyes scanning the street again. A black car passed slowly, then continued. Her fingers tightened on her clutch. Noel crossed at an angle that didn't draw notice, closing the distance without a word. He didn't ask if she needed help. He didn't offer to walk her. He simply fell into step beside her, as if they'd arrived together, his voice calm and low. Heading toward Market Street? She looked up, startled, but not scared. Her eyes met his for a second too long. "I am," she replied, her voice smooth but strained. "Did we meet earlier?" "Number. But you looked like you didn't want to be alone." A pause, then, "That obvious. To someone who knows what to look for." They walked in silence for a moment. The tension in her shoulders eased slightly as they reached a corner where the light shone brighter. Still, she checked behind her once more. Noel didn't ask what was wrong. He simply said, "Would you like to walk a little further before getting into your car?" "I would," she said, more softly this time. They made a wide circle past the city's historic churchyard, the kind of detour that gave time to breathe. "I'm Noel," he offered, glancing sideways. She hesitated. "Farah." No last name, no title, just Farah. When they reached her car, a silver sedan parked under a well-lit magnolia tree, she turned to face him. "Thank you. You didn't have to do that." "I know." Farah studied him. "You don't seem like someone who just happens to be walking by." "I used to be a police officer. Habit dies hard." That earned a faint smile. "Well, I'm glad old habits still exist." She opened her car door, then paused. "Good night, Noel." "Good night, Farah." She drove away with the windows up, her face unreadable in the rear-view mirror. Noel stood still for a moment, watching the red taillights disappear into the curve of King Street. He didn't know who she was, not really, but something about her lingered. Not just her elegance, not even her unease. There was something familiar in the way she held herself like armor. The next morning, Noel woke to a light knock at his front door. He wasn't expecting anyone. An envelope, heavy and cream-colored, rested against the mat. No postage. Just his name written in delicate script. He turned it over in his hand, studied the texture. Inside, a single card, an invitation. Langford Hall. A private appointment. Today. Noel didn't move for a long time. Just stared at the name embossed in gold at the bottom. Farah Langford. He'd heard it before. Everyone in Charleston had. Banking heiress, patron of the arts, philanthropist, the face of Southern grace in magazines that lined the salons on Broad Street. He looked back at the card. It didn't feel like a thank you. It felt like something else entirely. He arrived that afternoon at the gates of Langford Hall, tucked into a tree-lined road just past the historic quarter. The estate was understated but commanding. Wide porches, tall windows, live oaks draped in moss. A woman with kind eyes and silvering hair opened the door. "You must be Mr. Whittaker. I'm Colleen," she said, ushering him in. "Miss Langford is expecting you." Inside, the house was warm, quiet. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish and lilies. It didn't feel like a place where laughter lived. It felt restrained, like everything had to be perfect, even in silence. Farah waited in the study. She stood by a tall window, sunlight casting shadows across the tailored lines of her suit. Today, her mask was back on, poised, precise, untouchable. "Mr. Whittaker," she said as he entered, offering a polite nod. "Thank you for coming." He didn't sit until she gestured. "I wanted to thank you, properly, for last night. You seemed like you needed someone to walk with," he said simply. She gave a small, tight smile. "I did. I also need more than that." A pause. "I'm not going to waste your time with pleasantries," Farah said. "There have been things happening lately. Subtle, quiet, but unsettling." "Stalkers?" She shook her head. "No threats, nothing direct, just messages. Invitations to events I never responded to. Flowers from unknown senders. People showing up on my staff who can't explain who hired them. Things that sound innocuous when said out loud. But they don't feel that way." Noel leaned forward slightly. "You haven't gone to the police?" "No," she folded her hands. "And I don't want to. Because of who you are. Because of what they'll assume. That I'm overreacting. That I'm paranoid. That it's all in my head." Her voice tightened. "I'm used to being doubted, Mr. Whittaker." He studied her. "What are you asking me to do?" "I want someone watching the patterns, quietly. Someone who knows how to pay attention. I don't want cameras. I don't want uniforms. I want discretion. A long beat passed between them. And I want to feel safe in my own house again." Noel didn't answer right away. He looked out the window at the garden beyond. Neat, precise, too perfect. "I'm not part of a company," he said. "I don't have contracts or hourly rates." "Good," Farah said. "Neither do the people I trust." Another pause. The room felt heavy with everything unspoken. "You don't know me," Noel said quietly. "I know enough," she replied. "You saw a stranger alone on a dark street and chose to walk beside her without needing to be asked." He held her gaze. Her words were calm, but her eyes told the truth. She was exhausted, not just by fear, but by pretending she wasn't afraid. Colleen reappeared in the doorway. "Miss Langford, your call with the foundation is in 10 minutes. Farah nodded, but didn't move. "Please think about it, Mr. Whittaker. I'm not asking for muscle. I'm asking for presence." He stood. "I'll be in touch soon," he said. And for the first time, Farah looked like she believed him. Noel didn't sleep that night. The quiet hum of the ceiling fan above him felt louder than usual. The room at his small rental off Calhoun Street was dim, save for the amber glow from a street lamp outside. He lay on his back, one arm under his head, staring at the faint shadows dancing across the ceiling. Farah Langford. It wasn't just the name. It was the way she carried herself. Like someone raised to make everything look effortless, even when it cost her something. He'd met a lot of people who wore masks, but hers wasn't just for protection. It was stitched into the fabric of her life. She had asked him to watch the patterns, to be present. Not as muscle, but as stillness. It was the kind of request you couldn't take lightly. And something in her eyes had said she didn't ask many people for help. He rose before dawn, made coffee, and opened the windows to let in the early breeze. Charleston always felt softer before the city stirred, before the noise, the heat, the polished smiles. There was something about the quiet that made the truth louder. By 8, he'd made up his mind. He drove back to Langford Hall. The morning sun painted gold across the estate's white columns. Ivy crawled up one side of the house in disciplined lines, not a leaf out of place. The gravel drive crunched beneath his tires. As he stepped out, the front door opened before he could even knock. Colleen stood there, cardigan draped over her shoulders, her expression unreadable. "I told her you'd come," she said. Noel nodded once. I don't like loose ends. You're not the only one, Colleen said, stepping aside. She's in the sunroom. He followed the soft creak of old hardwood through the hallway. A glass-panelled door stood open at the end, spilling warm light into the corridor. Farah sat in a linen chair, one leg tucked under her, barefoot, with a cup of tea balanced in her hand. She wasn't dressed for a meeting, just a soft blouse and light trousers, her hair loose. She looked younger this way, or maybe just less defended. I didn't expect you this early, she said, setting her cup down. You asked me to be present. I'm starting now. She held his gaze for a moment, then gave a single nod. Colleen appeared again, this time holding a thin leather folio. I took the liberty of preparing some basics. Schedule, staff names, household routines, just so you're not walking in blind. Noel took it. Thank you. Also, Colleen added, lowering her voice, you'll want to keep an eye on this week's guest list. There's a board dinner on Thursday. Half of them want something from her. The other half want to replace her. Farah sighed. It's not that dramatic. It is, Colleen said, then turned and disappeared down the hall. Noel stepped into the room fully, setting the folio on the side table. Your assistant doesn't sugarcoat things. She's been with me since my father passed, Farah said. She's earned the right not to. Noel sat opposite her, glancing around. I take it this isn't where the threats happen. Threats? She asked. He looked back at her, steady. The unspoken ones, the ones that don't need words to make their point. Farah hesitated, then nodded slowly. Number. This room is safe. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. Tell me what's changed. Not the obvious things, the subtle ones. What feels off? She picked up her tea again but didn't drink it. It's the little inconsistencies. A door unlocked when I remember locking it. Invitations to events I never agreed to attend. A caterer calling to confirm a brunch I never scheduled. Noel listened, his expression calm but focused. Colleen brushes it off as administrative errors. Maybe she's right, Farah said. But then I get these letters, handwritten, no return address. They don't say anything overt, just things like, the past has a way of following you, or even the most perfect mask slip eventually. He tilted his head. You keep them? She nodded. I'll want to see them. I thought you might. He watched her for a moment, then asked, Why me, Farah? You could afford to hire anyone. You could call in a dozen firms with glowing reviews and shiny credentials. She looked down at her tea, swirling it gently. Because those people work for companies. They follow playbooks, they report to teams, and they're more interested in protocol than instinct. She looked up again. You're quiet. You notice things. And you didn't try to impress me. He didn't respond, just nodded once. Farah stood and walked to the tall windows that overlooked the garden. My father used to say, the higher the walls, the more people try to climb them. I built a life that looks beautiful from the outside, but sometimes I think I've made it too beautiful, too easy to envy. That's not your fault. Number. But it is my problem. They stood in silence for a few beats. Outside, the landscapers moved slowly across the lawn, raking fresh mulch into the rose beds. It was all so pristine, so controlled, but there was tension in the quiet. Farah turned back toward him. There's something else. I'm listening. My cousin, Charles Wentham, he used to be involved with the foundation. My father left him out of the estate plan, and he didn't take it well. Is he still around? He's on the board. Officially, we're civil. Privately, less so. She crossed her arms. I don't have proof. But every time something happens, it seems to follow one of his visits. Noel watched her. Does he know you've brought someone in? Not yet. You want to keep it that way? For now. I need to know what I'm dealing with before I show my cards. He nodded slowly. I'll start with your staff, schedules, patterns, the letters. And if it's someone inside, then I'll know where to look first. Farah's eyes flickered with something. Relief, maybe, or fear disguised as control. Miss Langford? A voice called gently from the hall. It was one of the housekeepers. Your call with the event planner is in 5 minutes. Farah sighed. Of course it is. She moved toward the doorway, then paused. You'll find a copy of the guest list in Colleen's packet. And one more thing. Noel stood as she spoke. I don't expect you to protect me from every discomfort, she said. But if something doesn't feel right, I want to know. Don't filter it. I don't do filtered, he said. She gave him the faintest smile, then disappeared down the hall. Noel stood there for a moment, looking around the room. The house was beautiful, yes, but it was also tight, curated. It was a life that had to be managed like a brand. He stepped closer to the window and looked out again at the gardens, at the white trellis arch near the far corner where roses climbed in perfect order. It was all too perfect. And perfection always had a price. He took a breath, picked up the leather folio, and began reading. The rain had come in softly by evening, just enough to mist the windows and slick the stone path outside the guest house. From the wide front porch, Noel could see the glow from the main house's upstairs rooms. Light moved behind the curtains. Farah was still awake. He'd spent the last few hours reviewing every page of the folio Colleen had prepared. Schedules, blueprints of the estate, staff names, shifts, vendor logs. Everything appeared orderly, professional, routine, too routine. Every gardener, every caterer, every cleaner had been with the household for at least 2 years, some longer. That should have been reassuring. But something about the sameness unsettled him. A system too tightly wound always frayed in silence. A knock sounded at the door. Noel opened it to find Colleen standing with a ceramic teapot and 2 mugs balanced on a tray. You look like you could use something warm, she said. He stepped aside, letting her in. She moved with the quiet ease of someone who'd lived a long time in other people's shadows. You're not just the assistant, he said, closing the door behind her. She smiled as she set the tray on the side table. I'm the furniture, the wallpaper, the person everyone sees but rarely notices. He sat, nodding once. You've been with her since her father passed. Before that, actually, I worked for her mother briefly before she passed, then stayed on when Mr. Langford took the reins. She poured the tea, her hands steady. Farah was 22 when it all landed on her shoulders. Grief and money are a brutal combination. Noel leaned forward. Why didn't he leave any of the estate to the cousin? Charles Colleen's lips pressed into a thin line. He tried. Once. But Charles pushed too hard, wanted control, not partnership. Mr. Langford cut him out after a very public disagreement. Of course, he kept him close. On the board, with minimal power. But it was clear Charles would never be the future of Langford Holdings. And Farah? She didn't want it. Not at first. She was teaching art history at the college. She thought her life would be smaller, quieter. Colleen stirred her tea. But when her father died, she didn't run. She stepped in. Noel watched the steam rise between them. She looks composed, but she's unraveling underneath it. Colleen didn't argue. She's being watched, Noel said. Colleen blinked. You're sure? Number. But it feels like it. I can't prove it yet, but this place is too perfect. That kind of order isn't natural. She studied him for a moment. Farah trusts you more than she'll admit. But be careful. People in this house are loyal, but they're also afraid. Of who? Colleen hesitated, then quietly said, of being on the wrong side. This estate, it's a world of favors and social balance. People like Charles know how to tilt that balance without ever raising their voice. Noel nodded, letting the silence settle. Colleen stood, collecting the tray. If you ever feel you're in too deep, just remember, She doesn't need saving. She needs someone who doesn't flinch. She left without another word. The next day the rain cleared and Charleston bloomed again under a soft spring sun. Noel spent the morning quietly observing the routine. Staff moved like clockwork, gardeners raked, a delivery van arrived, dropped off floral arrangements, and left within minutes. Housekeepers reset linens and checked guest rooms. Everything looked perfect. Too perfect. He walked the grounds alone mid-afternoon, noting blind spots in the surveillance layout, unlocked gates, and a few odd scuff marks near the garden trellis. Nothing dramatic, nothing conclusive, but nothing sat quite right. In the late afternoon, Farah found him standing by the reflecting pool near the edge of the estate. She was barefoot again, heels dangling from her hand, her voice soft behind him. "You walk like you're searching for something," she said. "I am." "Find it?" "Not yet." She stepped beside him, the sunlight catching the edge of her blouse, turning the silk nearly translucent. She didn't seem to care. "I used to play out here," she said, "before all of this. Before it was mine to manage." He glanced at her. "Do you miss it? Being young or being invisible?" He didn't answer. The wind moved through the trees like a hush. "Everyone thinks I'm good at this," she said after a pause. "The dinners, the donations, the smiling, and I am. But that's not the same as belonging to it." "You belong to it," he said, "but it doesn't belong to you." Her eyes snapped to his. He didn't flinch. Farah let out a quiet laugh. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone who wanted to impress me, or be impressed by me. You don't do either. You don't need another person orbiting you." "No," she said, her voice quieter. "I need someone who stays grounded when everything else is spinning." They stood in silence again. Then she turned toward him, not closer, but clearer. "You said last night you're not with a company. So why this? Why show up for someone like me?" He considered the question. "I've seen what happens when people stop feeling safe in their own skin," he said. "I don't like watching that happen, especially to someone who's pretending not to be tired." Farah's expression softened, just slightly. "You see too much," she said. "I notice what's already there." They walked back slowly, not touching, not speaking. But something between them had shifted. The space was no longer filled with tension. It was something else now, a quiet alignment, a shared awareness. Later that evening, as the last of the sunset dipped behind the magnolias, Noel found a letter slipped beneath the door of his guest suite. No return address, just a cream envelope with his name. He opened it carefully. Inside, a single line. "Not everything on this estate is what it seems." Noel looked up, and for the first time since he arrived, he felt it deep in his chest, just beneath the calm, just beyond the quiet order. A crack in the foundation. The morning arrived cloaked in a thick, pearly fog that blanketed the estate and softened every edge of Langford Hall. The usual brightness of the garden seemed muted, as if the world had paused to catch its breath. Noel stood at the edge of the veranda, coffee in hand, staring out across the lawn, where the roses now looked like ghosts of themselves. The letter from the night before sat on the desk behind him, unfolded, unanswered. "Not everything on this estate is what it seems." The words echoed louder the longer he tried to ignore them. Noel had read it 5 times, not because it said much, but because of what it didn't. The paper was the same high-quality stationery used in the main house. The handwriting was blocky, intentionally neat. Someone had gone through effort to sound ordinary, which meant they had something to hide. He stepped back inside and folded the letter carefully, placing it in a folder beneath his notes. He didn't bring it to Farah, not yet. If someone in the house was watching him, testing him, he needed to keep his own cards close for now. Later that morning, Colleen found him in the side library, reviewing guest lists and board meeting schedules. "We've got movement," she said, her tone low. He looked up. "Charles arrived early," she added. Farah wasn't expecting him until this evening's dinner. Noel rose, straightening his shirt sleeves. "Where is he now?" "On the back terrace, with Farah." Her voice tightened. He didn't knock. Noel followed her through the east hallway, slowing just before the tall French doors that opened to the terrace. He stood just out of sight, listening. "I don't recall inviting you for brunch, Charles," Farah said evenly. "I was in town. I thought I'd stop by, see how my dear cousin is holding up under all this pressure." "You mean the pressure you helped manufacture?" she replied. Charles chuckled, the sound too smooth. "Don't be cruel. I care about this family's legacy just as much as you do." There was a pause. Then Farah said, with a voice that barely masked the exhaustion, "Legacy doesn't mean control, Charles." "And yet here we are," he replied. "You guard the foundation like it's your private kingdom. People are beginning to wonder if you're spreading yourself too thin." Noel stepped forward, letting the door creak slightly. Charles turned first, tall, expensively dressed, too polished for someone who claimed to be spontaneous. "Ah," Charles said, eyeing Noel with mild amusement. "The mysterious shadow I've heard so little about." Noel said nothing, just stood beside Farah, silent and steady. Farah looked at him briefly, something passing between them that didn't need words. "Noel, this is Charles Wentham," she said, her tone clipped. "My late father's nephew." Charles extended a hand. "Always good to meet the help." Noel didn't take it. "I'm not on the payroll," he said, voice level. Charles's smile faded just enough to reveal the irritation beneath. "Well, in that case, I suppose you're just invested." Farah stepped between them, redirecting the energy like a practiced diplomat. "Charles, I have a conference call in 15 minutes. If there's something you need—" "I need to know if you're stable enough to lead," he said bluntly. The air stilled. Noel saw her flinch, barely, but it was there. Farah held her ground. "If you had genuine concerns, you'd bring them to the board, not to my porch." Charles smiled again, but this time it didn't reach his eyes. "Consider this a courtesy." Then he turned, nodded once to Noel, and walked down the steps to his car, as if he hadn't just gutted the air between them. Farah exhaled, not heavily, but carefully, like someone managing how much truth to let out at once. Noel waited, said nothing. Finally, she spoke. "He's been circling like this for months, popping in unannounced, digging through records, charming the wrong people." "He's testing boundaries," Noel said, "seeing how close he can get without pushing you into action." She nodded, almost absently. "He knows the house rules. He just chooses not to follow them." They walked back inside together, quiet steps echoing softly against the wood floors. As they passed the central staircase, she paused. "I've spent years walking this house like it's sacred ground," she said quietly, "honoring it, protecting it, but sometimes I think it's just walls." Noel looked at her. "You're not the one making it feel that way." She met his gaze, eyes lined with the weight of unspoken things. "You say very little, Noel, but you see too much." He gave a slight shrug. "You asked me to notice." Colleen appeared from the kitchen hallway. "Farah, your call with the preservation committee is starting." Farah nodded, brushing past both of them, but not before Noel noticed the shift in her. Shoulders just a bit straighter, eyes a little colder. That was how she protected herself. Not with anger, with elegance. As she disappeared into the study, Colleen stepped closer. "You heard him, didn't you?" she asked. "All of it." Colleen shook her head. "He's not here to help. He wants a piece of it, or all of it. He won't stop with words." "No," she agreed. "He never does." Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the magnolia trees and the estate prepared for the formal board dinner, Farah stood in her dressing room, staring into the mirror. She wore a deep emerald dress, tailored perfectly, hair swept into a clean twist. But her reflection didn't comfort her. It looked like a version of herself she wasn't sure she recognized anymore. Noel waited just outside the door, reviewing the list of tonight's guests, most familiar names, donors, board members, a few political figures. One name was missing from the RSVP list that had arrived only hours ago. Charles. He wasn't listed. But Noel had no doubt he would show. He knocked lightly. They're beginning to arrive. Farah emerged slowly, adjusting an earring. Do I look like someone who's in control? You look like someone who knows how to hold a room, he said. She paused. That's not the same thing. No, he agreed, but it's enough to keep them guessing. She gave him a long look, more weight in that glance than in 1,000 polished words. Then she stepped past him and descended the stairs. And as she entered the grand foyer, all smiles and gracious nods, Noel followed silently behind, watching every angle, every whisper, every movement, because the house might have looked like it was hosting a dinner party. But something about the night ahead felt more like a test. The chandelier in the Langford Hall dining room cast a golden hue over everything, softening sharp glances, smoothing over tension, polishing smiles that didn't quite reach the eyes. Glasses clinked softly, silverware tapped against porcelain, and the sound of practiced laughter drifted across the table like perfume. Sweet, calculated, and never quite sincere. Farah sat at the head, poised and radiant, her emerald gown glowing under the light. She was speaking to the Foundation's chief legal advisor, nodding politely. But Noel, seated in the shadows near the wall, not a guest, not a servant, watched her with an intensity she never seemed to notice. Or maybe she did, and chose not to acknowledge it. She hadn't seen the way people looked at her tonight. But Noel had. He saw the sideways glances, the way conversations paused as she passed, the whispers that picked up just after she smiled and turned away. It was all too polished to be accidental. And then, just past the halfway point of the dinner, Charles arrived. No announcement, no greeting. He slipped in through the side entrance with the confidence of someone who knew his absence would make more noise than his presence. He poured himself a drink at the sideboard without asking, then casually strolled toward the table as if nothing at all were off. Farah didn't flinch, didn't even blink. She simply lifted her glass to her lips and said, without turning her head, "Charles, how lovely of you to arrive uninvited, again." "Family doesn't need an invitation," he replied with that slow, grating charm, especially not when the family legacy is on full display. Some of the guests shifted awkwardly. A few chuckled, unsure if they should. Farah set her glass down, the faintest chime ringing out. "Then kindly find a seat at the far end," she said. "I believe the one next to the auditors is available." Charles gave a slow smile and walked to the empty seat, placing his drink down with a deliberate clink. So good to be among visionaries. Noel watched the entire exchange from the back of the room, his arms crossed loosely, his weight evenly distributed, his eyes taking in every detail, especially the way Farah's fingers curled slightly into her palm beneath the table, the only sign of tension she allowed herself to show. As the dinner progressed, conversation danced between estate projects, foundation goals, historic preservation tax incentives. But beneath it all, there was a hum of something else, an unspoken uncertainty. And when the room was at its warmest, its most comfortable, Charles struck. "Speaking of preservation," he said, swirling his drink, "I do hope the Foundation's finances are as tidy as the dinner service." Farah didn't respond right away. A few heads turned, a couple forks stilled midair. "I assume you're asking because you've seen something troubling," she said, voice calm, eyes unreadable. "I've seen something concerning," he replied, his smile unwavering. "Some inconsistencies, minor ones, of course, easy to miss." The room went still. Noel's jaw tightened. Farah leaned back, just enough to reclaim her space. "If you have concerns, Charles, You're welcome to bring them to the board at our scheduled meeting next week. Tonight, we're here to celebrate a $250,000 scholarship grant, not air your assumptions." Charles raised his glass as if to toast. Of course, just making conversation. Noel could feel the tension ripple beneath the surface. It wasn't the words, it was the timing, the setting, the audience. Charles didn't care about the truth. He cared about the doubt, and tonight, he planted it, right in front of donors and press. When the dinner finally concluded, and the guests began to disperse, Farah excused herself with a polite smile and a nod, then disappeared up the side stairwell before anyone could corner her. Noel waited 10 minutes, then followed. He found her in the conservatory, alone standing in the middle of the room among the orchids, her bare feet sinking slightly into the plush rug, the heels from earlier discarded beside the piano. The room was dim except for the soft glow of a reading lamp near the chaise. She didn't look at him when he stepped in. "Did I handle it well?" she asked, her voice steady, but quieter than usual. "You were controlled, sharp, dignified, but not convincing." He paused. "That's not what I said." She turned to him then, her eyes rimmed with emotion she wasn't willing to name yet. "I used to believe that if you were prepared enough, kind enough, professional enough, people would leave you alone. They don't." "No." She gave a soft laugh, nearly a whisper. "They just find new ways to question you." He stepped closer, not touching, just sharing the space. "You did fine." "I felt humiliated, and I couldn't even show it." "You didn't need to." She looked at him then, something raw flashing through her calm. "I hate that he knows where to hit me. Not with facts, not with evidence, just with implication." "Because implication is a seed," Noel said. "You don't have to water it. The crowd will do it for you." Silence settled again, thick with understanding. Farah sat on the edge of the chaise, pressing her palms into her knees. "I was 12 when I first realized what it meant to be watched," she said. "My mother had just died. My father was giving a speech, and I was in the front row, in a dress that itched and heels that didn't fit. And every woman in the room was watching me. Not out of sympathy, but to see if I would cry. And I didn't. I couldn't." Noel didn't speak, just listened. "After that," she continued, "I learned how to hold still, how to breathe in silence, how to disappear in the middle of a crowd while still smiling." She looked up. "But now, with Charles, it's different. It's not about performance. It's about survival." Noel met her gaze. "Then stop performing." She blinked. He took a breath. "The people who matter already see who you are. You don't have to keep proving it." Farah stared at him for a long moment. Then, softly, "You make it sound easy." "It's not, but it's honest." She looked down at her hands. "Why are you really here, Noel? You invited me. I mean, why haven't you left?" He took a beat. "Because you asked me to stay." That stopped her. The air between them thickened. Slower, still, and for a brief second, Farah's posture softened. Not slumped, not broken, just real. "Would you sit?" she asked. Noel lowered himself onto the chaise opposite her, their knees almost touching, the quiet stretching between them like a thread. Outside, the night deepened. The garden lights flickered on one by one, and inside, in the stillness of the conservatory, something shifted. Not romance, not yet, but something close to trust. And that, between two people who had forgotten how to offer it, was far more dangerous. The morning after the dinner came with a heavy sky, low and grey, pressing against the windows like it knew something no one was saying. The air hung thick with humidity, and the usual hum of the estate was quieter, as if even the staff were moving a little more carefully than usual. Noel stood on the side veranda with a steaming mug of coffee, watching a pair of groundskeepers trim hedges that didn't need trimming. Busy hands to fill the silence. A few feet away, Colleen reviewed a delivery log, her pen tapping the clipboard in an absent rhythm. He didn't ask her anything. He didn't need to. The mood said enough. "She didn't sleep," Colleen said finally, still not looking up. "I figured." She kept walking the house, lights on, lights off, staring out the windows like she was waiting for something to knock. Noel nodded once. Charles got in her head. Colleen looked at him then, a flicker of worry in her otherwise controlled expression. "He always does. That's his game. He plants things that fester." "He's not just playing games anymore." Colleen's mouth pressed into a line. "What did you see last night?" A shift, subtle, but it was there. A few board members didn't speak to her after dinner. Some left earlier than usual. The donors were polite, but the warmth was gone. Colleen exhaled slowly. He's cracking the edges. And he's not working alone. That made her pause. "I got a letter, slipped under my door. Same style Farah described. Same paper. Someone's watching this house from the inside." Colleen's expression tightened. "Show me." He shook his head. "Not yet. I need to see who notices I haven't mentioned it." She gave a small nod, respecting his approach, even if it made her uneasy. Inside the house, Farah sat at the long kitchen table, untouched tea cooling beside her. Her fingers tapped against the rim of the cup, slow and steady. She wasn't dressed yet, just a pale robe and slippers, her hair loosely tied back. But even like this, there was elegance, effortless, ingrained. Noel stepped in and stopped in the doorway. "You look like you haven't left that chair in a while." "I haven't," she said, not turning. He moved closer. The silence between them felt different now. Not uncomfortable, just full. "Talk to me," he said. Farah looked at him, something distant in her eyes. "Do you think people ever really change?" He tilted his head. "Depends on what they're running from." She gave a half laugh. "I used to believe in potential. In the idea that you could reshape a legacy if you just worked hard enough, smiled often enough, played the game well enough. And now I think some names come with anchors, not wings." He sat beside her. "Last night rattled you." "No," she said. "Last night confirmed what I've been pretending wasn't true." She reached into a drawer beside her and pulled out a folder, sliding it across the table. "Vendor inconsistencies," she said. "Invoices that don't match the services we actually used. Charles has been funneling small amounts through shell contributors. Nothing that stands out on its own. But over time, it adds up." Noel opened the folder, flipping through the clean, curated pages. "How long have you had this?" "A week. I was waiting for the right moment. But after last night, I can't wait anymore." "Does the board know? Number not yet?" "And you're trusting me with it?" She looked up. "I don't know what I'm doing anymore, Noel, but I do know this. Every time I've ignored my instincts, it's cost me something." He watched her carefully. "Then don't ignore them now." She leaned back, pressing her hands against her eyes for a moment. "The problem isn't just Charles. It's the culture my father built. Silence, appearances, loyalty over truth. It's infected everything." "Then change it." She looked at him, tired but fierce. "If I try to root this out, it'll get ugly. And public." Noel nodded slowly. "But if you don't, it'll rot from the inside." They sat there, both knowing that line between silence and exposure was getting thinner. Later that afternoon, Farah hosted a meeting in the formal parlor with two board members, Mrs. Clara Heath, an old family friend with a silver bob and eyes like polished glass, and Vincent Hale, a financial advisor who smiled too much and said too little. Noel stayed just out of view, but within earshot, standing in the hallway beside the grandfather clock. "I wanted to bring some irregularities to your attention before the full board sees them," Farah said, her tone even. She slid copies of the documents across the coffee table. Clara adjusted her glasses. Vincent skimmed. This is concerning, Clara said slowly. Do you believe this is Charles's doing? Vincent asked, glancing up. I believe someone's using the foundation as a cover, and I believe Charles has both motive and access. Clara gave a quiet nod. He's been overstepping for years. But, Farah prompted. But, Clara said delicately, he's also well connected. If you move too fast, it could fracture donor trust. I'm not worried about their money, Farah said. I'm worried about their silence. Vincent leaned forward. What exactly are you asking us to do? Support a full audit, independent, transparent, before the board vote next month. Clara hesitated. Vincent folded his hands. That's a bold move, Farah. It could cause waves. Good, she said. It's time we stopped sailing in still water. From the hallway, Noel couldn't help the faint smile that pulled at his mouth. After the meeting ended and the parlor cleared, he met Farah in the upstairs hallway. You did it, he said. I lit the match, she replied. Let's see what burns. She moved past him, her pace brisk, her shoulders squared, but he caught the slight shake in her hands as they brushed against the banister. Later that night, as the estate dimmed and silence took its hold once again, Noel returned to his guest suite and found another envelope on his desk. Same stationery, same clean, calculated handwriting. But this time, just one word written inside, closer. Noel stared at it, his jaw tight, his pulse steady. Not from fear, from clarity. Someone inside this house was watching, and they had just changed the rules. Charleston's sky had turned glassy blue by mid-morning, the sun creeping slowly through the moss-covered oaks as Langford Hall stirred to life. But inside the estate, the brightness did little to lift the air. Noel sat at the edge of the garden, the envelope from the night before laid open on the bench beside him. One word, closer. It hadn't been a warning. It had been a whisper. He'd slept in light bursts, every creak of the house keeping his mind alert, every shadow outside the guest house drawing his eyes toward the windows. Whoever was leaving the letters wasn't just watching. They wanted him to know it. And now, the game had shifted. He wasn't chasing a pattern anymore. He was being baited. A soft sound broke his thoughts, Farah's voice quiet behind him. You didn't come to breakfast. I wasn't hungry. She moved to stand beside him, arms crossed loosely, her silk blouse catching the breeze. You look like someone waiting for something to land, she said. I am, he replied, nodding toward the letter. Another message. She looked down, reading the words silently. Closer, she whispered, more to herself than to him. What does it mean? It means they're in the house, or they want us to believe they are. Farah didn't react right away. Her eyes stayed on the page, but her shoulders tensed, barely, but he caught it. Why now? She murmured. Why not months ago? Why wait until I push back against Charles? Because now you're dangerous, Noel said. You're not just wearing the crown. You're asking questions. Farah glanced at him, her gaze more vulnerable than she wanted to admit. You don't think Charles is behind the letters? I think he wants power, Noel said. But this is psychological. It's intimate. This is someone who knows how to make you hesitate. She went quiet, her eyes drifting toward the magnolia trees. I had a dream last night, she said softly. I was walking through the halls of the house, but all the doors were missing, just empty frames. And every room I passed looked familiar, but wrong, like the furniture had been rearranged just slightly. The colors too bright. She looked at him, her voice tight. It didn't feel like a dream. It felt like a warning. He stood slowly, folding the letter and slipping it into his pocket. You're being watched. Whether it's real or a message, we have to assume they know your routines, your habits, maybe even your weak spots. Her lips parted, a trace of breath escaping like she'd just realized something. My art studio. What about it? It's the one room I don't let anyone clean. Not even Colleen. I lock it when I'm done. And the key never leaves my desk drawer. Let's go. They moved through the halls quickly, not drawing attention. Noel's presence, now familiar to the staff, earned him polite nods, but no lingering glances. That was the benefit of being invisible when needed. The studio sat in the west wing of the house, just off a narrow hall lined with old paintings. Farah unlocked the door, and Noel entered first. Nothing looked disturbed, but he didn't trust what looked normal anymore. Farah stepped in behind him and froze. The window. Noel turned. The latch on the far window was undone, the sash raised slightly, barely an inch, but just enough. I never leave it open, she said. Never. Noel crossed the room, inspecting the sill. There were no fingerprints, no dirt on the floor, just the faintest imprint in the dust along the inside edge of the windowsill. A single line, curved, as if something round had been placed there momentarily. Someone's been in here, he said. Farah's face tightened. But why not take anything? Why not leave a real message? Because this is the message, he said. They want you to question what's real, your memory, your control. She moved to the center of the room, arms wrapped around herself. This house was supposed to be a legacy, a sanctuary. My father built every inch of it to keep us insulated, and now I feel like I'm walking through glass. Noel looked at her, his voice calm. Then stop walking like you're barefoot. Farah turned sharply, caught off guard. Start owning your space again, he continued. They want you second-guessing every instinct, every decision. But you're not fragile, Farah. You're just tired of pretending you aren't. Her lips parted, but no words came. The silence between them stretched long and full. Then, softly, she said, "What if I don't know how to fight this way? You don't have to fight alone." Their eyes locked, and for a moment everything around them, the old wood, the oil paintings, the ticking clock, fell away. There was no estate, no letters, no legacy. Just two people in a room too quiet, each trying to remember what trust was supposed to feel like. Farah broke the moment, turning toward a canvas draped in white linen. She pulled the cloth off slowly. It was a portrait, half finished. A woman seated on a velvet chair, her posture graceful, but her eyes empty. "I started this 3 months ago," she said. "It was supposed to be my way back in, after the noise, after all the charity galas and press. I thought if I could paint again, I'd find a piece of myself I'd lost." She paused, her voice faltering. But I couldn't finish her eyes. Every time I tried, they came out wrong, cold, guarded, like she didn't trust the person painting her. Noel stared at the canvas, then back at her. "She looks like you." Farah nodded slowly. "I know." He stepped closer, not touching, just close enough. "She's not finished because she's still waiting," he said. "Not for paint, for permission." Farah turned to him, something cracking just slightly in her expression. "Permission to be what?" "To be seen," he said. "Really seen." The silence that followed felt heavier than anything they'd shared. And then, from the hallway, a knock. Colleen's voice, tight and urgent. "Farah, Noel, you'll want to come downstairs." They exchanged a glance. Farah moved first, head held high, but her fingers brushed Noel's arm as she passed. A whisper of contact, unspoken, but grounding. When they reached the foyer, Colleen stood by the door, holding a manila envelope. "This came by courier," she said. "No return address, no signature." Farah opened it carefully, eyes scanning the page. Then she went still. Noel stepped beside her. "What is it?" She turned the paper toward him. It was a printed spreadsheet, anonymously marked. It listed every foundation account, every donor, and 3 shell entities with withdrawal patterns that traced back 6 months. Charles's name wasn't on it, but his signature was. Farah's voice was barely a whisper. It's all real. Noel looked at her, and this time, she didn't look away. Farah sat motionless in the study, the spreadsheet still clutched between her fingers, the corners slightly crumpled from her grip. The afternoon light filtered in through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the antique rug. She wasn't blinking, just staring at the document like it had teeth. Noel stood near the fireplace, arms crossed, his eyes steady on her. He wasn't pushing. He knew better than to rush someone whose entire foundation had just tilted beneath them. Colleen hovered in the doorway, her expression unreadable but tense. It's proof, Farah finally whispered. Clear, undeniable, and I should feel relief, but I don't. Noel shifted his weight. Because now it's real. Number. Because now it's mine to act on. Her voice caught. I wanted so badly for this to be a misunderstanding. Something explainable. Something forgivable. She set the paper down with care, like it was made of glass. It's not just money, she said, it's trust. My father built this foundation on his name, and now if I expose this, I don't just damage Charles. I damage everything that name has touched. Colleen stepped forward, voice low. Your father also built this place to serve the city, not his pride. He'd rather see the truth told than legacy protected by silence. Farah looked up. But we live in a world where perception is louder than fact. The second this gets out, it'll be a headline, and not one of them will write the nuance, just the fool. Noel moved to the edge of her desk. That's why you don't let them write the story. You write it first. Her gaze flicked to him, sharp and searching. You really believe that works? I believe people respond to courage, especially when they expect shame. The room went quiet. Then Farah reached for the page again. Her hand didn't shake this time. Call an emergency board meeting, she said to Colleen. This week, I'll show them everything. Colleen nodded and slipped out silently. Farah leaned back in her chair, eyes closed. Noel watched her for a moment, then quietly said, You know he won't go down quietly. Her eyes opened. I'm not asking him to. Noel sat across from her, folding his hands. What are you asking? She held his gaze. That you stay close. Because of whatever happens next, someone's going to try to stop me. He nodded once, no hesitation. Later that evening, the air outside turned heavy again, like the weather itself was unsure what came next. The garden lights flickered on one by one as Noel walked the perimeter of the property, checking gate locks, staff schedules, guest logs. Nothing out of order. But his instincts were sharpening, listening for the wrong silence, the wrong detail. Halfway through his second loop, he found something strange. A stack of mail tucked under one of the planters near the east garden door. Sealed invitations, returned and unopened. Each one bore the Langford Foundation seal. Each addressed to donors who were marked confirmed in the official ledger. He brought them to Farah, who sat in the small library off the main corridor, curled up in a chair with a blanket draped over her lap. Recognize these? He asked, dropping the stack gently on the table. She sat up straighter. These were supposed to go out 3 weeks ago. They didn't. They were stashed. Farah flipped through them, her voice barely above a whisper. These are key supporters, people I was told declined to attend. Someone didn't want them there? Her jaw clenched. Which means someone has access to the internal planning team. She stood, pacing now. The only ones with clearance are Colleen, Charles, and Melanie Dre. Noel looked up. The reporter. She's not officially on payroll, Farah said. But Charles brought her in as a media consultant last quarter, said it was a strategy move for transparency. And now she's publishing half-truths with just enough fact to sting. Farah stopped pacing. I need to talk to her. Noel stood. Not alone. The next morning, they met Melanie at a cafe tucked into the historic district. far enough from Langford Hall to breathe without the weight of family eyes. Melanie arrived 10 minutes late, dressed in carefully chosen casual, jeans, blazer, windblown hair just polished enough to be effortless. She smiled as she slid into the seat. "Farah, always a pleasure." Farah's tone was cool. "We're not here for pleasantries." Melanie raised an eyebrow. "Then I suppose you're here about the donors." "You published information that was incomplete, skewed, and now I'm finding invitations that never made it to the recipients." Melanie shrugged. "My job isn't to manage your events, it's to report what I find." "What you find," Farah repeated, "or what Charles feeds you." Melanie leaned back. "Be careful, Farah. Accusing people without proof is how reputations get damaged." Farah leaned in, voice low and sharp. "So is laundering money through a charity." Melanie's eyes narrowed, her mask slipping. "You have a choice," Farah said. "You can tell the story honestly, or you can stay on the sinking side." Noel watched the exchange in silence, noting every shift in Melanie's posture, every flicker of emotion. Melanie stood, smoothing her blazer. "Be careful, Farah. Not everyone around you is who they claim to be." She walked out without another word. Farah sat back, exhaling. "That didn't go as planned." "She's rattled," Noel said. "That means you're getting close." Farah looked at him, her voice soft. "Then why does it feel like everything's about to fall apart?" He reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "Because it has to shake loose before it holds." Their eyes locked again, tension, trust, and something else passing between them like current. They didn't speak, but they didn't need to. The fight had begun, and neither of them was backing away. Langford Hall felt different by late afternoon. The light shifted in strange ways across the floors, shadows stretching longer than they should have. Even the familiar creak in the third stair sounded different, hollow, like the house was holding its breath. Farah moved through the corridor like someone trying not to wake something. She'd just come from another tense meeting, this time with the Foundation's legal team, who'd asked too many careful questions and offered too few clear answers. Noel watched her approach from the study doorway, arms crossed, reading her body language before she even saw him. She stopped when she noticed him. "You're waiting." "I usually am." She offered the smallest smile, tired but grateful. "We need to talk." Already assumed we would. She stepped past him into the study, motioning for him to follow. The door clicked shut behind them, muffling the noise of the world outside. "Clara Heath called me today," Farah said. "She wants to move up the emergency board meeting." Noel's eyes narrowed slightly. "How soon?" 2 days. Too soon for Charles to panic, just soon enough to corner him. She nodded. "That's what I'm hoping for. But there's a catch. There always is. She wants to host it off-site, at her law office downtown. Says it'll feel more neutral." Noel stepped closer. "It also puts you on her turf." "I know. But I can't refuse without looking like I'm hiding something." He studied her face, the calm surface pulled tight over something deeper. "Do you trust her?" he asked. "I used to," she said quietly. "But lately I don't know who I trust except you." The words landed heavier than either of them expected. She looked away. "I'm sorry, that wasn't fair to say." "It's honest," Noel replied, "and it's mutual." Farah moved to the bookshelf, fingers drifting across the spines as if searching for something that used to comfort her. She stopped at a first edition of her father's favorite volume, a collection of Southern essays on legacy and loss. Her hand lingered there. "I keep thinking about how my father used to handle things like this," she said. "Backroom conversations, quiet favors, never anything in writing. And now you're doing the opposite." "Because I have to," she said. "Because if I keep playing his game, I'll never win mine." She turned to face him, something sharper in her voice now. but every step forward feels like another piece of me gets traded away. Noel stepped in, closer than before. That's what they're counting on, that you'll wear yourself down until you settle, until silence feels safer. I'm not settling. I know. Their eyes met, not just across a room, but across all the things neither had said yet. The tension wasn't loud, but it hummed, low and steady, like music in the walls. Farah blinked, breaking the moment. There's something else. Noel waited. I found something in the archive room. He followed her down 2 flights of stairs, into a part of the house rarely visited. The air grew cooler, and the scent of old paper, dust and time surrounded them like a second skin. She led him to a locked cabinet, produced a small key, and opened it slowly. Inside were dozens of folders. Financials, old meeting transcripts, handwritten memos from her father's final years. She pulled out one labeled Langford Holdings, Internal Communications, and set it on the table. There's a memo in here, she said, flipping carefully. From my father to the Foundation's original auditor. It references Charles by name, saying he expressed unusual interest in discretionary accounts. There's no formal accusation, but it's a trail. Noel read the paragraph. His expression didn't change, but his silence thickened. This predates the recent issues by over a decade, Farah added. He's been positioning himself longer than I realized. Which means his network runs deeper. Yes. Which means someone else in this house might be part of it. She nodded slowly. Noel looked up. We're running out of neutral ground. He walked to the cabinet and began scanning the rest of the labels, searching for anything out of place. After a few minutes, he stopped. This one doesn't belong. He pulled out a slim red folder, unlabeled, tucked between 2 older files. Inside, a single sheet of paper, a printed itinerary. Noel handed it to Farah, her brow furrowed. This is my travel schedule from last spring, but no one had this. It wasn't public. Not even Colleen saw the full list. Noel tapped the corner. Look at the notations. Small marks, asterisks, circles, highlighted times. Someone was tracking your movements. For months, Farah sank into the chair behind her, the color draining from her face. They knew when I'd be alone, when I'd be speaking publicly, even hotel room numbers. Noel crouched beside her, lowering his voice. This isn't just Charles. This is planned, systematic. Someone has access to your private records. Which means it's someone close, she whispered. And we've been underestimating them. The room fell into silence, heavy and close. Farah looked at him, her voice barely audible. I don't know how to breathe in this house anymore. He reached out and gently took her hand, not in comfort, but in solidarity. Then let's find a way to make it yours again. And for the first time in days, she didn't pull away. She just closed her eyes and held on. The sun had started to dip behind the oaks, painting Langford Hall in soft amber tones. Light streamed through the windows of the second-floor corridor, casting long lines across the polished floors. Everything looked warm, peaceful, safe. It wasn't. Farah stood at the window of the east guest room, staring out at the garden. She didn't speak. She hadn't since they came up from the archive room. Noel stood nearby, watching her reflection in the glass rather than breaking the quiet. She finally exhaled, her voice a thin thread. I thought I had time. You did, Noel replied, until someone took it from you. She turned then, slowly, her eyes meeting his. I don't think this is about Charles anymore. Not really. Go on. I think it started with him. I think he created the cracks, but someone else saw them and stepped in. Noel nodded once, the shape of the thought already forming in his mind. Someone using his ambition as a distraction. Farah crossed the room and sat on the edge of the window seat, hands clasped tightly in her lap. This was never just about money. It's about access, reputation, and control, which makes your foundation the perfect target. Because it's trusted, she said. Because I was naive enough to think good intentions were a shield. They were, he said, until they weren't. She looked up at him, something different in her gaze now. Not just fear, not just exhaustion, resolve. Do you ever wonder what kind of person you could have been, she said, if you weren't raised to be something else? Noel stepped closer. Every day. She nodded. My father didn't just build this place. He built me, curated me. Every word, every dress, every move, shaped for perception. I didn't become the woman I wanted. I became the one he needed. She paused. And now I have to decide which one of us stays. Noel didn't speak for a moment. Then quietly, you already decided. The moment you chose to bring the truth forward. A flicker of something, recognition maybe, passed between them. Then a knock at the door. Colleen stepped in, her voice measured. You have a visitor. Farah blinked. Now. She's early, Colleen said. Melanie Dre. Farah stood. Bring her to the west sitting room. No drinks, no warmth, just space. Colleen nodded and left without another word. Farah turned to Noel. I want you in the room. Of course. When they entered the sitting room, Melanie was already seated. Her posture was relaxed, but her eyes tracked every movement, every glance. She was dressed in crisp linen, hair pulled back, not a strand out of place. Farah didn't bother to sit. She stayed standing, one hand on the back of the chair. You've been busy, she said evenly. Melanie gave a cool smile. So have you. Let's not play games. You've had access to donor information, board schedules, and internal calendars. You didn't just write a story. You orchestrated a narrative. I reported what I was given. By whom? Farah's tone sharpened. Charles? Melanie tilted her head. You think too small. Noel stepped forward slightly, eyes locked on hers. Then tell us who we're really dealing with. She smiled again, this time with a hint of condescension. Do you honestly believe Charles has the intelligence to pull off something this intricate? He's a puppet. Always was. Farah's voice dropped. Then who's pulling the strings? Melanie stood now, smoothing her skirt. You'll find out soon enough. But for now, you should know something. This story isn't about right or wrong. It's about timing and control. Farah's jaw tensed. Melanie walked to the doorway, then paused. You want to win this. You'll have to burn more than your reputation. You'll have to burn the house you were raised in. She left without another word. The silence she left behind felt louder than her voice ever had. Farah turned to Noel, her breath shaky. She knows things she shouldn't. She's been given more than documents. Someone inside is feeding her details. Timing. Language. She walked to the mantel, fingers trailing along the edge like she was trying to remember something. Or forget it. I can't fight something I can't see, she whispered. You're not alone. She looked up at him, and this time, her guard didn't rise. Her expression didn't shift. It just stayed. Bare. I need you, Noel. Not just here, with me, in this. You already have me. The space between them tightened, the air growing dense with everything unspoken. She took a step forward, then another. Their hands didn't touch, but they stood so close the energy between them felt like a pulse. Farah's voice dropped. I don't know what happens next. You don't have to. Her breath hitched, her eyes never leaving his. But before the moment could break open, Colleen reappeared. There's more, she said. We just received another message. This one, addressed to you, Noel. His face stilled. Farah stepped back slightly, composed once more. Let me see it. Colleen handed it over. No envelope this time, just a single sheet, folded. Noel opened it slowly. 2 words, board vote, and a date. Tomorrow. Farah looked at him, voice low. That's not a coincidence. No, Noel said, eyes narrowing. It's a warning. She took the paper from his hand, reading it again and again. Then, with new clarity hardening behind her eyes, she said, "Then we won't wait for them." She turned toward the door, her voice steady now. "We go first." The morning was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that calms. It was the kind that settles into the walls like tension, a hush before a thunderclap. Langford Hall felt heavy, still, a house waiting to see what its owner would do next. Farah stood in her father's old office, staring at the painting above the fireplace, an oil portrait of him in his younger years. Confident, commanding, guarded. She used to find comfort in that image. Now she wasn't sure if it was strength or armor. Noel entered without knocking. He didn't need to. There were no formalities left between them. They confirmed the vote for tonight, he said. 7 p.m., Clara's office. Farah didn't turn around. "How many do you think I have?" Noel exhaled. 3, maybe 4 if Hale flips. She closed her eyes. "I can't go in there begging," she said. "I need to walk in like I'm not afraid to lose." "Because you're not." She turned to him then, voice steady, but raw. "A few days ago, I wanted to protect the legacy. My name, the family's place in this city. And now," she lifted her chin, "now I just want the truth to outlive the silence." Noel nodded, taking a step closer. "Then we get ahead of it." "How?" "We go public. Controlled, precise, on your terms." She blinked. "You mean today? Right now?" Farah hesitated, the idea crashing into her with equal parts fear and fire. "Colleen's been drafting a statement," she said slowly. "I told her to wait." "Don't wait. Don't let them set the tone. You speak first. They respond to you, not the other way around." Farah crossed the room, opened the side cabinet, and pulled out a small stack of envelopes she hadn't touched in years. "They were my father's private correspondences. One of them might help sway the board. He warned me once that if anything ever happened with Charles, to check the letters." Noel took them carefully, flipping through. Yellowed paper, old stamps, dates that went back more than a decade. And then he found it. A letter addressed to her father, signed by Charles. The language was cautious, but the intent wasn't. Farah read over his shoulder. "He was angling for control before my father was even ill," she whispered, positioning himself to take over operations, one small step at a time. "And now we show them this," Noel said, "along with the ledger, along with the invoice trail, all of it." Farah walked to her desk and picked up the statement Colleen had prepared. Her fingers trembled as she opened it, but only for a moment. Then, with careful precision, she crossed out entire lines, rewrote paragraphs, and when she was finished, she handed it to Noel. "Read it." He did. Halfway through, he looked up. "This is bold." "It has to be." "No disclaimers, no softened language." "I'm done protecting people who don't protect me." Their eyes held. Then she moved to the window, voice softer now. "Do you think it's possible to lose everything and still walk away with peace?" "I think peace comes from choosing the hard thing when the easy thing would have kept you comfortable." She gave a quiet, unsteady laugh. "Then I must be on the right path." Colleen appeared in the doorway. "Everything's ready. We can go live in 15 minutes. Farah nodded. "Use our social channels. No PR firm. No media filter. And the press. Let them catch up." Noel followed her through the halls, past the staff who paused to watch them go by. Something in the air told them this wasn't just another meeting. They stepped into the small parlor, now converted into a quiet live stream setup. Just a simple backdrop. One chair, a camera, no makeup team, no production crew. Just Farah. She sat, smoothed her blouse, took a breath, then looked into the camera. "My name is Farah Langford," she began, "and I am the daughter of the man who built this foundation." Her voice was calm, but every word carried weight. For the past year, I've been made aware of discrepancies within our financial structure. Discrepancies that point to misappropriation of funds by individuals connected to both our leadership and our legacy. She paused, letting the gravity settle. I have chosen to bring this forward today, not because it is convenient, but because it is necessary. Because silence for the sake of appearances is no longer something I will participate in. Noel watched from behind the lens, heart steady but proud. This wasn't just a woman reclaiming power. This was someone choosing truth over legacy, and the world would feel it. Farah continued, detailing the documents, the timeline, the proof. She named no names, but the implication was clear. This house, this organization, and everything it touches must be better than the mistakes made behind its walls. And I intend to see that through, no matter the personal cost. When she finished, there was no applause, no cue to cut. She simply stood, eyes unwavering, and walked out of frame. Noel met her outside the door. You just changed the entire conversation. Farah nodded. Now we see who's really listening. That night, the boardroom was quieter than usual. Clara sat at the head. Charles, unsurprisingly, was already there, a faint smile playing at his lips. Farah entered last. She didn't sit. She placed a binder in the center of the table. Everything is in there, she said. The audit trail, the private correspondence, the vote you were planning to surprise me with tonight. I welcome it. A pause. Because whatever happens in this room, I will still tell the truth tomorrow. She turned and left. Noel followed, the weight of silence behind them louder than words. In the elevator, she finally breathed. What if they vote me out? Then they do. And what am I then? Noel looked at her, steady and certain. You're free. And for the first time in a long time, Farah smiled. Not because she won, but because she didn't hide. Langford Hall was still. Not silent, but still in that strange, suspended way a house feels when the future is being decided in a room just beyond earshot. The kind of stillness that pressed against the chest, like something about to break or bloom. Farah stood at the top of the grand staircase, her hands resting gently on the railing, watching the dusk settle in through the tall windows. Outside, the garden lights flicked on, one by one, like stars waking up late. She didn't speak. She hadn't since they left the boardroom. Noel stood nearby, leaning against the wall just out of her periphery. He didn't say anything either. He knew better than to fill this space with words. This was a moment that needed to breathe. Finally, Farah broke the quiet. Do you remember the first night you walked me to my car? Noel turned his head toward her. King Street. You had on that silver wrap. She smiled faintly, eyes still on the horizon. I remember thinking, if I looked confident enough, no one would ask if I was scared. And were you? I was terrified. He moved closer but didn't interrupt her silence. I've been terrified most of my life, Noel. Just good at dressing it up. She finally looked at him. I think I learned that from my father. Not how to be strong, but how to appear unshakable. You're not him. No, she said softly. But for a long time I wasn't myself either. She walked slowly down the stairs, each step measured, almost ceremonial. When she reached the foyer, she paused, turned, and looked up at him. I don't know what they'll decide. You already decided. Farah studied him for a long moment. What if that's not enough? Noel descended the steps, stopping when they were level. It is. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to wrap herself in those words like armor. But there was a sliver of doubt still clinging to her. Something tender and human that wouldn't be quieted until the final moment passed. Colleen stepped into view from the study doors, a file tucked under her arm, her expression unreadable. They've made a decision, she said. Farah's throat tightened. You heard? Colleen nodded. Clara just called. The vote passed. Noel waited. Farah didn't move. They're keeping you, Colleen said, voice quiet but full. Farah's breath caught. They are? With full authority. Charles abstained, of course. But the rest? You reached them. She sat down slowly on the bench by the window. Not out of exhaustion, but out of something else. Something like release. I thought I'd feel triumphant, she said. But I don't. What do you feel? Noel asked. She looked up, eyes bright. Unburdened, Colleen handed her the file. They've asked for a full forensic audit starting Monday. You'll need to assign a new financial chair, and they want Melanie removed from any PR involvement. Farah nodded, absorbing the list without blinking. Done. All of it. Noel watched her carefully. Her voice had strength again. Not the kind built to perform, but the kind forged from choosing the harder road. After Colleen left, Farah turned to him. I want to show you something, she said. She led him down the West Wing hall, past the portrait gallery, to a small locked door near the end. She opened it with a key from her necklace. Inside was a room Noel had never seen. Smaller than the others, intimate, quiet. It was her mother's old studio. Light spilled in through the slanted windows, catching on dust motes and half-finished paintings. Everything had a soft haze to it, like time had stopped inside the walls. Farah crossed to an easel near the window and pulled the cloth from the canvas. It was the portrait again, the one she'd started weeks ago, the faceless woman in the velvet chair. Except now, the eyes were finished, alive, clear. Noel stared at it, caught off guard. She doesn't look like someone hiding anymore, he said. She's not, Farah replied, because neither am I. He looked at her, a weight in his chest he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. You've changed. I've returned, she said, to myself. They stood there, surrounded by quiet, by memory, by truth. Then, softly, Farah said, What happens now? Noel stepped closer, his voice steady. Now, you build something that's yours. Her breath caught. And if I asked you to stay, she whispered, I'm not going anywhere. The room held still for a moment, long enough for the future to find its shape. And then she reached for his hand, not out of fear, not to be saved, but because in the stillness, in the undoing, they had found something solid, something real. The morning after the vote, Langford Hall felt like a different house. It wasn't louder or busier. If anything, it was quieter. But the quiet no longer felt heavy. It felt earned, like the calm after a long-held breath, finally exhaled. Farah stood at the breakfast table, stirring her tea absent-mindedly. She wasn't dressed for a meeting or a press call, just a soft sweater, her hair tied up casually, barefoot. It was the first time Noel had seen her look unguarded. She glanced up as he entered the room. You sleep? She asked. A few hours, he said. You? I tried, but the silence kept me awake. He poured himself coffee, sat across from her. Silence can be loud when you're used to fighting, he said. She smiled faintly. Exactly. They sat there a moment, the light drifting in across the hardwood floors, warming the space between them. Colleen stepped into the room, holding a tablet. You'll want to rain tapped lightly against the tall windows of Langford Hall, threading down the glass in lazy trails. It was the kind of rain that didn't chase anyone inside. It simply quieted the world. Farah sat alone in the drawing room, a mug of untouched tea cooling in her hands. The fire was lit but low, flickering gently like a pulse beneath the calm. The audit team had arrived hours ago. They were still downstairs working through files, hard drives, contracts, quiet professionals with clipped tones and efficient fingers. The energy in the house had shifted. Less tension, more anticipation. Like the weight had begun to lift, but no one dared say it aloud. Noel stood just inside the doorway, arms folded, watching her. You haven't moved, he said. I can't decide if this is the calm after the storm or before the next one. He stepped closer. Could be both. She gave a faint, tired smile. You're not much for soft reassurance, are you? Number. But I'm still here. That meant more than she could say. Farah set the tea down and looked out the window. The moment I started all this, I told myself I could control how it ended. If I followed the truth, stayed composed, didn't flinch, the outcome would match the intention. And now I know better. She turned to him, voice low. The truth doesn't guarantee peace. It just guarantees light. Noel nodded, not because he agreed with her, because he understood. A soft knock at the door pulled them both from the moment. Colleen entered, her expression unreadable, though her eyes gave something away. Something unsettled. There's someone here to see you, she said to Farah. Farah blinked. Now. He didn't call, didn't wait for an invitation. Noel's shoulders straightened. Charles. Colleen nodded. Farah stood, smoothing her blouse, brushing a hand over her hair even though it didn't need fixing. Her voice was calm, but her pulse betrayed her. Where is he? In the garden room. Noel moved to follow her, but Farah paused. No. He looked at her, unsure. I need to do this alone. A beat passed. Then Noel stepped aside, trusting her in the way that mattered most. Farah walked the long hall with slow, deliberate steps. She could hear the soft patter of rain on the skylight above, the subtle creak of wood beneath her feet. When she reached the garden room, she pushed the door open without knocking. Charles stood by the windows, hands in his pockets, staring at the soaked hedges like they owed him something. Farah, he said, turning with a faint smile. You've been busy. I don't recall scheduling a visit. I figured you'd be too gracious to send me away. She didn't answer, just stepped fully into the room and closed the door behind her. He motioned toward the chairs. Sit. I'll stand. He shrugged. Fair enough. She crossed her arms. Why are you here? To talk. One last time. Before this goes further than either of us can walk back. She tilted her head. Further? You mean the part where you took money under the foundation's name, funneled it through ghost donors, then positioned yourself to replace me? He smiled like it was all an unfortunate misunderstanding. You're looking at it too narrowly. I'm finally seeing it clearly. Charles took a step closer. We could have been a team, Farah. You have the name, the grace, the presence. I have the network, the strategy. Together I would have been a figurehead, she said, cutting him off. You never wanted a partner. You wanted a shield. He exhaled through his nose, eyes narrowing. You've made this very personal. It is personal. They stood in silence, the room thick with unsaid things. I came here today to offer you a way out, he said finally. She blinked. A way out? You stepped down gracefully. No scandal, no headlines. You claim you're moving into private philanthropy. We keep the name intact. The board stays balanced. And you, he paused, voice softening, you walk away clean. Farah stared at him, the audacity in his voice, the practiced tone, the pretense of kindness wrapped around the blade. She walked toward the windows, letting her fingers rest against the cool glass. I gave up clean the moment I chose the truth, she said. He sighed. So, this is it? Yes. Charles's tone hardened. You think you've won something? No, she said, turning to face him fully. I think I finally stopped losing. For the first time, he didn't smile. Farah opened the door. You should go. Charles hesitated, but then he nodded, a flicker of something dark in his eyes. Frustration, maybe, or something closer to fear. As he stepped past her, he paused. You don't realize what you've set in motion. She looked him straight in the eye. I do. That's why I'm not stopping. And then he was gone. Farah stood alone in the hallway for a moment, her breath catching at the edges. The air felt sharp, cold from the storm outside. But inside her, there was warmth. When she turned, Noel was there. Not close, just there, as always. She walked toward him slowly. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. I let him speak, she said. I let him try to bargain, to charm, to do what he's always done. And I didn't flinch. Noel's lips curved, just slightly. I didn't think you would. Farah exhaled, the weight finally easing in her chest. I feel lighter, she said. Not because it's over, but because I stopped asking for permission to end it. He stepped closer. You didn't just end it, he said. You changed it. Their eyes met. Something deepened. Then she whispered, So what now? He didn't answer right away. He reached out, brushed a piece of damp hair from her cheek, and let his hand linger just a second longer than necessary. Now, he said softly, you live like it's yours again. And in that moment she did. The morning sun poured into Langford Hall like it belonged there, soft and golden, streaking across the marble floors and warming the air with the kind of light that made even old rooms feel new again. The storm had passed, literally and otherwise. Farah stood barefoot in the garden, damp grass beneath her feet, a cup of coffee in hand. The estate behind her was quiet. No meetings, no boardrooms, no rehearsed pleasantries. Just peace. Honest, unadorned peace. She stared out across the grounds where the roses were blooming brighter than they had in years. Or maybe she was just seeing them clearly for the first time. Noel stepped out from the side path, hands in his pockets, moving with that same steady calm that had made her feel safe long before she could admit she needed it. He didn't speak at first. He just stood beside her, taking in the same view. Colleen says the audit team's wrapping up, he finally said. No surprises, no new fires. Farah nodded. For once, quiet feels deserved. He looked at her. You did it. She smiled faintly, eyes forward. I didn't win something, Noel. I just didn't run. That's what winning looks like sometimes. She turned to him slowly, studying the man who had walked beside her, not just in danger, but in doubt, in silence, in truth. I thought I was supposed to protect the name, she said. That if I held on tight enough, stayed polished enough, the legacy would survive. And now, she looked back toward the house, exhaling. Now I know the legacy doesn't live in the name. It lives in the choices, in the integrity. He nodded, then added, in the people who stay. Farah glanced at him. Are you staying? He met her eyes. If you want me to. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped closer, placing her hand against his chest, just over the quiet thud of his heart. I don't need someone to rescue me, she whispered. I need someone to see me, stand with me, and stay, even when it's not dramatic. He leaned in slightly, forehead resting against hers. I already am. The moment hung there, soft and full, the way only the truth can be when it's finally said out loud. She closed her eyes, a smile curving gently at the corners of her mouth. Then she whispered, Let's go in. There's still work to do. He reached for her hand, and together they walked back toward the house, not to return to what was, but to begin what would be. The walls were the same, but the story inside them had changed. And this time, it was hers.